Hi, I'm Ken Ward. This is Andre Zaleska, my partner in life and in the JP Greenhouse Project. And I'm going to talk for 10 minutes. Andre's going to talk for 10 minutes, and then we'll have whatever questions or comments you have. In thinking about how to address climate activism this morning, I thought there were three relevant things that I would like to try to get across or deal with. One is the cosmic or existential challenge of being an activist. The second is how we think about the immense political challenge of forcing America to deal with the greatest moral issue of our time and possibly all time. And then the practical questions about what one person or one family can do in the midst of all this. I've got 10 minutes. Should not be a problem. I thought it was, but first of all, actually, let me describe our house for a second. We bought a house that's right on the line between Jamaica Plain and Roslindale last year, a year and a half ago. It was built as an old store in 1909, been used for various purposes, and had been sitting abandoned for the last 5 years. In April of this year, we began a gut rehab. We brought it all the way down to the studs, took out everything that was in it other than that, everything but the roof. We were worried about that for a while. And then with the help of a firm, design-build firm, Place Taylor, we have rebuilt it. We're trying to reach something called the Passive House Standard, which is an extremely high level of energy efficiency that is about 3 or 4 times stronger than a LEED certification or Energy Star. We put the plaster on last week. I've been in the building for the last week putting in bamboo flooring, which is painful because it gives you slivers that you can't see. But I go in there about 8 or 8:30 in the morning. The building has no heat. All it has is insulation. The temperature this last week, when nighttime temperatures were 19 degrees, is never below 53. It's always comfortable in this place. It is heated solely by the sun, our light bulbs, and our body heat while we're working. This stuff works. And I'm amazed by it every time I go in there. But the thing that the meaning of it is that we can do what we need to do without a great deal of hardship. What we gave up to do this was 3 inches of living space, because we had to build a second wall on the inside to take 2 levels of insulation. That was it. Other than that, I mean, people can look at the pictures and think, well, aesthetically, that may not be the kind of house I want to live in. But for us, it's the same kind of house that we would be living in had we not tried to reach the Passive House Standard. To reduce energy use this is a building where you could see the holes. You could see sunlight coming through. I have no idea what the energy cost was before. But if we can do that on our relatively modest income, we spend about $240,000 on this, and we still have a lot of our own work to do. That took all of our savings. And in fact, we're thinking, if any of you happen to have a profligate lifestyle and a lot of money, we're thinking about selling carbon indulgences around Christmas time, so keep us in mind. Anyway, that's as a backdrop. I thought it was interesting in looking at the schedule that we were sandwiched in between a Jim Hansen this evening and a speaker from NRDC, because it seems to me that those two, they are essentially poles of the conversation or debate we're having. On the one hand, Jim, I think, represents the acceptance of climate science realities and all that flows from that. NRDC, I think, is the epitome of achieving what we can do within current political constraints. And the difference between those two is what is the existential gap that climate activists inhabit. What do we do when we have scientists saying, well, Boston's going to be underwater pretty soon. We may not even be able to do anything about it, but if we're going to do something about it, it has to be transformational. It cannot be dealt with, I think, by politics as usual. that's why I don't happen to think that the NRDC approach is going to work. Confronted with this, it seems to me that there are kind of three ways you can go. This isn't scientific, just my opinion. One of them is you can accept the climate science realities and say, okay, well, our challenge is to remake politics as we know it. First in America, and then through America in the world. The other is to say, well, that ain't going to happen. We need to get done the very best we can get done now and hope that it's either not as bad as we think it is or that somebody else sometime in the future will finish the job, which is basically what I think all of the major U.S. environmental organizations' position is. And the third possibility is to give in to either despair or denial, depending on your personal, predilections. The Yale School of Forestry just released a poll yesterday, I think, that shows that denial is on the uptick considerably. I don't know if anybody reported on the poll here. The percentage of people, these comparisons between 08 and recent December, percentage of the American public who says that it is happening, that there is such a thing, has declined from 71% to 57%. The people who say that it is not happening has doubled from 10 to 20%. Perhaps more disturbing, I'm not sure, is the percentage who say that they do not need any more information to choose their position has increased from 18 to 29%. We're dealing with an increasingly polarized group here. So denial is on the rise. I think despair is on the rise as well. It's just not, it doesn't appear in the polls. Maybe people who are in despair don't answer the phone as much. I do know that in our personal lives, and this is part of the strange dichotomy of living at this time, where we have a public discourse that doesn't really address what the hell is going on here. And one of the ways that comes out is when you're sitting around at parties or whatever, people will start talking about, well, where do you plan to move to when all hell breaks loose? This is a common conversation. Maybe it's just in JP, but I don't think so. I think there's a lot of people who are sitting around going, well, is Vermont far enough? You got other people that are going, no, I'm thinking, Tasmania or New Zealand, something like that. Don't know how we're going to get there, but that's, I think those are our choices. So the question then becomes, what to do? How much? Yeah, 2 minutes? Yeah, fine, 2 minutes. Well, in my view, one, we need to tell the brutal truth no matter what. We have to give up on this concept that we can somehow solve climate change by pretending that it's something else, like an economic opportunity. The mere fact of doing that, the argument for green jobs, which our president partly got elected on, over other Democratic candidates who were running on this is a problem, it is completely contradictory to the reality that the world is in the process of ending. It's like standing up in a crowded theater and going, fire, fire. Oh, it's a great opportunity. Take some chairs out. We'll rebuild the theater while we're doing it. It's utterly, at some unconscious level, it's contradictory. Either we're going to hell in a handbasket, in which case we have to say so and do what we can, or we have this marvelous opportunity to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. I think it's the first and not the latter. Conditional or consequent with that is we should stop worrying about the majority. We should be focused on the 2 to 3% of Americans who agree with this and are going quietly crazy. Those are the people who will do anything. Those are potential activists. And the third thing, and related and coming from that group, is that we, as climate activists and the organizations which represent us, which is all U.S. environmental organizations, need to act as if we believe what we're saying. We're in a situation, try to pick any other issue. Imagine, like Social Security. Suppose Social Security was about to go down the tubes. And 15 years later, the major organizations concerned about Social Security were still not in a coalition, or still not saying the same thing. In our case, we've got organizations that are engaged in 20-year planning process, figuring out how they're going to invest their money to reap benefits, 25 years from now. Well, we'll be underwater then. Really, what should happen now is Sierra Club and NRDC and Greenpeace and everybody else who has any money, we've got some money, should simply cash in all their investments. And I mean, that's the situation we're in. We need to change things around immediately and overnight, and it takes some money to do that. And there's other things as well, but the last specific thing to mention is just that there are some campaigns out there. They are attempting to deal directly with the truth. We act as the hub for Bill McKibben's 350.org for New England, in which the Shamels and other people have been organizing as well. And the purpose of 350 is to focus attention on what Jim Hansen will talk about, which is what is the standard? What is it that we have to achieve? The effort is less visible in the US, despite all of our best efforts. But it has been, I would say, a huge success internationally, and the single important thing to come out of Copenhagen, as far as I'm concerned, would be a change in the moral gravity. And that was in large part due to 350. So,
I'm wondering if we should have gone in the reverse order, because we're here to talk about political and personal responses, and I got the personal part of it. But it all sort of blends together anyhow. So we decided to found the JP Greenhouse. We had found, needed a house. We bought an old derelict house. We decided to rehab it into zero carbon home and garden, and that's the JP Greenhouse. So this was done as out of personal need for housing, out of a sense of talking and kind of throwing words at the problem, particularly a lot of writing. It was getting very grim. And that's a lot of what a climate activist gets to do, is just be angry and, dissatisfied with the situation. This is a very difficult, painful time to be alive, and to make any joy out of it at all, we felt like we had to be creating something in the midst of destruction. That's the house. It is a demonstration home. We live there. We're moving in 3 weeks. It is open for anyone to visit at any time. All you have to do is get in touch with us, and we intend to demonstrate several things. One of them is what life could be like with relatively small changes. I mean, it's not a small thing to rip a house apart and insulate it to 16 inches each wall. On the other hand, it didn't actually cost more than a standard rehab. And we've got a house that functions without any heat. And we've got enough space, not even a quarter acre of land, this is an urban garden, but enough space, we think, to grow probably half of our own food, possibly enough for all of us. There's 5 of us in the family, if necessary. Throw in a few chickens and rabbits if we have to. So just to show that that can be done, and it can be done in an urban setting, that's part of the demonstration. There are other things that we're trying to demonstrate, and we've been using several venues. We have a blog on grist.org. We do speaking engagements like this. We bring anybody who wants to our house to give them a tour at any time, showing them whatever is going on, and it's not been pretty so far. I mean, there's still a dumpster in the back, and the yard is full of construction waste. It looks terrible. But that's part of what we mean by transparency of demonstrating just how kind of messy this transition is. But messy, I think, in a joyful way. Other things that we're pretty transparent and clear about are difficulties in our relationship, me and Ken, over what level of green building are we going to, for example? What amount of our personal finances is going into this crazy project? Who's going to be working on the house and who's going to be working outside the house? So, we've been clear about our parenting issues. We have a blended family, 3 boys, and there have been issues there. And I think parenting is a huge climate problem. I think most of us actually know that. I go around saying in groups things like, I don't see any reason to save for our children's college education. I can't imagine that will be useful. And I get people very angry saying this, particularly if they have college-age children. It's really, there's deep conflict. But I honestly think maybe you're going to want to push your kids towards the trades. I mean, we're looking at change to hopefully a very sustainable local society. I'm not sure that the cost of private college is worth it anymore. So that has huge implications. You know, we don't push our kids very much academically. We try to get them outdoors as much as possible. We're trying to teach them things around the house because with a sense of, you know, this might be more useful than something else in the future. How do you keep your kids from despair? That's huge. I think that's one of the biggest things that I worry about all the time, is what is going to happen. They're little now, you know, the oldest is 11. What is going to happen when they can interpret the science themselves and see what we're leaving them in this world? So the house, one of my clergy friends put it so well, I was so flattered. He said, the house is an active witness, a living witness. And I was just very moved by that, and I think it is a good way to put it because we're just ordinary people bumbling along as best as anybody can. We're trying to make it very explicit how hard this is, and that this is the personal being political. This is what, you know, this is what we're doing. So, how much time do I have, Ken? Okay. One of the things I was asked to speak about is what can citizen activists do, and I think that a thing we face as activists and citizens and parents and people is the sense that this is so huge and beyond our control. It's hard to know what to do. Bill McKibben and 350.org have helped me a lot. Just watching Bill throw his whole life into this, and I followed his whole career as a writer, has been very inspiring because, and not because I think anybody could do it, but I think there's a lot of people who could put down everything or a lot of everything and put their money where their mouth is the way Bill has. For smaller things than that, I think it's really important to work on deniers, and I don't mean the type of people who comment on your blog post, you know, the really whacked out people with the or the punctuation issues and, you know, the all caps. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about when you go to Thanksgiving dinner and you start talking about climate change with your family and everybody's kind of like, here she goes again, you know? The basic discomfort that people have with this topic, and the fact that it then makes some of us quite shrill, you know, we're trying to be very persuasive. I've tried to turn that into basic empathy for how painful this is to talk about, and to work on an elevator speech that is all about my pain is your pain, essentially. We are all really in this together, and we do need to talk about it. We need to take the skeleton out of the closet. The last thing I'm going to talk about, and this is one place we're hoping to take the JP Greenhouse, is that you do need positive models and you need a sense of the future, and I think that one of the best places to look for that is the transition movement. Transition Towns, you can Google it, is about creating sustainable communities, about communities or towns or neighborhoods. It can be any body of people looking at how they can make themselves sustainable, assuming that we are not going to have the same access to perhaps the whole nation, because that requires the use of fossil fuel. We are going to have to rely on our actual communities, our actual neighbors, thinking about food locally and water locally, transportation locally. So community building is the most heartening thing that we can be doing right now. I think that's it. Thank you.
I was interested in the way you formulated it there at the end. It's not so much a question any longer of what shall we do, but what shall we do next? In other words, how do we take it from the grand to the specific? And what shall we do next has a lot to do with finding out what other people are doing and reconstituting a sense of community around that. You cited one particular group, and I guess there are now groups emerging around the world focusing on sustainability, how to get back to self-sufficiency. Now I remember it's even within the lifetime of people like me that it moved from a kind of negative valuation to positive valuation. It's kind of like, you know, for a while people smoked. My roommate in college was Edward R. Murrow's son, and he personally and painfully experienced the tragedy of smoke. As we all know, Edward R. Murrow was, in a sense, a symbol of what happened to those who smoked. And from that time, mid-60s, to the present, we've witnessed a social transformation, whereas it's actually now publicly considered sort of embarrassing to smoke in someone's face, in fact rude, and you can publicly say, get out of here, you know, this is not possible. That's within a 40-year period, or 50 years. Same period was the one in which economic growth was touted as a positive value over self-sustaining systems, over what were called peasant agriculture, as it were. So they just aimed at self-sufficiency, right? That's all they were interested in, but we're interested in growth. Well, within that same 50 years, we've come to a position to, in fact, valorize self-sustainability and to regard growth not as a solution to the problem, but maybe the source of the problem, the growthism, the belief in continuous growth. Now, it'd be an interesting effort to then get in touch with the communities that are moving beyond growthism, back to, if you want to use backward-forward language, ahead to, if you want to think about the future, self-sustenance, maintenance, not stasis, but homeostasis. Okay, questions?
It's a question and a comment. Again, I'm Roger Shamel with the Global Warming Education Network. I want to applaud what you guys are doing as a fellow activist myself. I just briefly started following Bill McKibben in his first walk across Vermont in 2006, and then my wife and I walked across Massachusetts with the Religious Witness for the Earth the next year, and we've been active with Bill McKibben's Step It Up and 350.org. And there are other activists in the room here from Lexington and Maynard and Somerville who have joined us, and we share your frustration, and we wonder too about what to do for the future. We've got some assets that we've accumulated from working hard and investing, and we wonder what the value will be of, let's say, for example, stock certificates versus real estate versus skills versus stuff in the house. My nephew comes into our house and says, hey, you've got Walmart in the basement here. Why don't you clean this place out? And I'm thinking, hey, this stuff could come in pretty handy in the end time, possibly. So I guess the question is from what you've learned.
Hand tools. You want to collect a lot of hand tools.
Yeah, hand tools, and I want to teach we're in this basically for the kids and the grandkids. It's not for our self-interest, but what can we do to help them? And I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions to send out to people beyond what you're doing or from what you've seen as to what people can do if they're in this group who see what's coming and can't believe that we're not doing more to stop it.
I think it's a matter of personal creativity. You figure out what is your place in the community and what you can bring to the community and work there. I have some experience working on big national models and campaigns, and more I think if I can just get my neighborhood organized, JP, on the way to sustainability, that'll be huge.
Well, first of all, I don't know why you're asking us. We should be asking you that question, Roger. But I'd say of the whole range of things, that those who are in a position to do so should immediately put their bodies on the line and engage in direct nonviolent action, particularly against coal plants and mining.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Geneva Boyer. As someone who sort of might still fall into the category of kid and grandkid, I want to respectfully disagree with the theory of sending the kids to trade school, like trade, that sort of thing, as opposed to colleges, because I feel like I'm going to start college in the fall, and what I want to go into is environmental studies, because what I want to do is I want to help solve this issue. Like there's so many things here, and we need people who have studied this, and you can learn a lot at home from your neighborhood, but just the opportunity to combine a whole bunch of resources in a way that's really empowering. I also want to say that in Newton, we also have a sustainability effort thing, Newton Eco Teams, newtonecoteams.org, which is getting people to to reduce their carbon footprints. And I also want to say that I lead a group I'm co-leader in the Newton Environmental Science program, which teaches 7th through 10th graders about environmental science. And would you be up for having like 15 middle schoolers tour your house this summer?
Oh yeah,
It's what we do.
We do that sort of thing. No problem. Talk to us afterwards.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to address your issue about the value of higher education, I don't want to put down anybody who's in college or going to college. I am watching people come out of college with huge debt and wondering about the proportion, the meaning of that debt in return for what they're getting. So I just caution you personally to watch the expenses.
I'd say, well, three things, quickly anyway. One of them is my boy is sitting out in the hallway playing on the computer because he plans to design computer games, and we'll support him right down the line.
If there are
such a thing. Two, the only problem with that is we've been educating people on, in college and so forth, on environmental education programs for quite some time, and it doesn't seem like that seems to me to support the current track that we're on. So unless there's a fundamental change with how we're teaching, then I don't see how that would work. I forget the third. Oh, the Bash and Build program. Good. Go ahead.
I'm George Mokra from Cambridge. I carry my solar around on my backpack every day. These are my bike lights. They work. And I say, solar is civil defense. So be prepared. All right? It doesn't matter whether somebody believes climate change is happening or climate change is man-made or human-made. If you propose to people that a couple of square inches of solar panel and a hand crank powering an LED light, right, and a rechargeable batteries is what you're supposed to have on hand in case of any kind of emergency or disaster, then it doesn't matter what their ideology is. And we fall into this abyss of despair because we don't see what to do. But I live in a rented apartment in Cambridge, and I have one room which is essentially off-grid that costs me less than $200. LED lights and little solar panels you can buy out of a catalog. I've been talking with people about Haiti, and the things that we're talking about as a future, what you're doing and what you want with the windmill and the solar that you want to add to the greenhouse. The little solar is civil defense for them is a rise in standard of living. And the rise in the standard of living for 1 billion people in this world who don't have access to electricity. So there's something else going on here in terms of how we're approaching this problem. We're approaching it as a problem. We're not approaching it as where's the solutions, what are the activities that we can do. You are doing it. Some of the rest of us are doing it here in Cambridge with the weatherization barn raisings. And personally, I'd like to see a weatherization barn raising on the White House. With this old house, to my knowledge, in 30 years has only done 2 solar installations. You know, those kinds of things. The poet said, sometimes you can see the whole great machinery come bearing down on top of you. And if you just jump 1 foot to either side, it completely passes you by. We need that kind of imagination. The neighborhood stuff, the individual stuff that you're doing, has to be done within, I believe, not out of despair, but out of strength.
I don't have too much to add to that except that George is right, and that it brings to mind, I'm always like following some crazy blogger or another, and the one I'm loving right now is named Dmitry Orlov. He's a Russian-American, and he does a lot of comparison between the Soviet collapse and what we're going through or about to go through here, and with the sense of like It's happened before. It could be done, you know? Russians are like that anyhow. But and people in most of the world are, because what we call a crisis is pretty normal in the rest of the world. So.
I was just remembering, I used to live at the very tip of Hull, which is a long ways from land. And I remember staying there with a neighbor of mine, and we started talking about apocalyptic futures, and it turns out he had his own whole vision of apocalyptic futures. And so we started talking about what it was going to be like living on Hull when it was an island, and I'd gone to the realtor person before I moved out there saying, well, it's got to be at least over 24 feet above sea level, and that's the only houses we looked at. But anyway, it was a fun, interesting conversation, except for near the very end, he started talking about defensible fields of fire and things that I was having trouble following. Didn't have a weapon.
My name is Robert Chu from Cambridge, and I applaud your efforts in doing your house over and to make it sustainable. And perhaps you've seen this movie, and perhaps some others have seen it, No Impact Man, in New York, in an apartment with just one child, a man and woman, and so one year of making no footprint, and organic foods and candles and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was wondering whether you would have consideration of having a documentary done on the work that you folks have done. That would be, get it out.
We've steadfastly refused to do that until we get an offer. I thought that Collins, No Impact Man Collins, was just a terrible PR stunt right up until he quoted us, at which point we became great fans. We have a set of things. We're approaching the same question, but from a bit of a different angle, which is how do we? My background, by the way, is I ran PIRGs as a director of New Jersey PIRG for many years, so I have a Nader-esque consumer perspective on all this, and working right now with Brian Corr, who runs a center here, Peace Center here in Cambridge. We're talking about the idea of, well, looking at what the choices between products or services are measured based on their overall carbon impact, something you don't really have any way of knowing. You have to know if it's sort of supposed to be green or not. But to give a quick example, the difference between a modern Airbus airplane and an old Boeing is huge in the amount of jet fuel they use. That's not transparent to us, but if it was, and if even a small percentage of airline travelers were to care about the difference and to request to be on flights with a highly efficient jet plane, those small incremental things can have an impact.
I'm Tina Woolston, and I think we've been talking about this a little bit today, and just as a resource for people out there who haven't heard of it, we have been sort of walking around the idea of social marketing, and what Tim mentioned with the people switch of smoking from being the cool thing to the non-cool thing was not just random. It was people sitting around, health educators, and sitting around and creating a marketing plan to reframe smoking as an uncool thing. And so if you guys are looking for ways to influence people, I would really recommend that you look at social marketing and look at these concerted efforts to consider where your audience is coming from, what their values are, and how you can reframe your argument or your behavior change to matter to them. And so in this way, I disagree with Ken in that I don't think that we can always tell people that it's not about the energy, it's not about that, because not everybody cares about what we do. I mean, I always think that everybody does, and I like to go to their website and be like, where the hell am I going to move to now? Good Jesus Christ. But some people don't value the same things we value, and so for them, they might value security, they might value their health, they might value their lettuce, whatever they value. If you can find a way to make your argument relate to what they value, then they're more likely to change, because behavior change and everything we talk about is behavior change. It's behavior change of politicians, it's behavior change of individuals. But remember, every politician is an individual, and people only change voluntarily their behavior.
Just to clarify, I'm not saying you shouldn't make those arguments. I'm just saying it shouldn't be the central argument that we make. And on smoking, the two people that mattered most to me, first in reading and then in person, were Bill McKibben and Ross Gelbspan. Ross being the former Boston editor of the editorial page editor of the Boston Globe, who went on to do an article on climate years ago, ended up writing a book which won the Pulitzer Prize and devoting his life to it. And the time before last, when I went to see him, he was like energized, his grandpa, energized, and he just decided to stop smoking, to which I had to reply to him, oh, well, I would just figure what the hell, I start smoking again.
I had something to say in response to that, but I don't remember. I think it was just that when I was talking about sort of the gentle elevator speech and approaching people with empathy, I think what you're saying about finding out what matters to them fits in there. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, Tom Olbert, thank you. I'd sort of like to follow up on that last question. I know you don't want to deal with the majority, but, frankly, it does take more than empathy. It does take, where people's next paycheck is coming from. And, model community, self-sufficiency, that's all great, on a neighborhood level. But, I mean, what do you say to a community of coal miners in Pennsylvania who, their entire livelihood for generations back? And people don't believe, really, in the long-term damage because they don't want to believe it. It is an inconvenient truth, and they have to seriously alter their lives to do it, and most people don't want to pull their kids out of college. So why not go with green jobs? I mean, people have to do something. People have to pay their checks, they have to put bread on the table. So what do you say to the coal miners, especially in coal mining states, it plays into the whole, political thing. Don't you have to provide alternatives? Don't you have to provide some solid economic alternative, whether it is, putting people to work, weatherizing homes, solar panels, building windmills like they do in Denmark, something. But if you say, okay, we're closing the mine, where do we go tomorrow? How do we feed our kids? You got to say something to them.
I think it's a great question. It depends. I mean, my answer to my personal view depends somewhat on how you think change happens. I think, especially in American history, that change happens with relatively small groups of people who feel extremely strongly about something and then make it happen. Everything from the revolution to ending slavery to prohibition to abortion. Those are all any major significant thing. If you look at the history of it, people didn't get together. The large organizations that were in favor of ending slavery didn't get together and have a discussion. Well, actually, they did. I wrote a piece recently comparing climate activism to slavery, the slavery issue, and how that was resolved, arguing that our major organizations are acting just like the major anti-slavery organizations acted for the 40, 50 years leading up to the Civil War, and they were accomplishing nothing. They were agreeing to compromise. Their perception was we have to negotiate within this current framework, which accepts the reality of slavery. We will solve it in our state, so Massachusetts will outlaw it, but our businesses will still keep, we'll still make money off of it, and our churches won't throw out the southern churches and so forth. That's the reality. I think that's a similar reality that we're in now. And to go from where we are to sharply polarizing the issue, there has to be some core of people who are saying this is the reality, and it has to be more than just scientists. For example, we have groups of students who are sleeping out in the Boston Common every Sunday over the last fall, and will be doing so in the spring. I think that's a genuine expression of I'm taking this seriously. Our future is serious here. So I don't think it's neat. And the answer in West Virginia is, yeah, that's it. There can be no more coal. So no, there's no more mining. Now, what we do with people who are displaced by that is another question. I happen to think that the same group of nations that got together in Copenhagen and agreed to do nothing, China, U.S., and Australia, between the three of us, we control 82% of the coal. We could, if we wanted to do so, simply buy it out. Buy everybody out. It's not that much money. And put all of that money and all of the ingenuity of those three nations into quickly getting renewables up and running. I think we could just say, well, on this date we'll end mining, or we'll phase it out in 5-year caps until it's done. I mean, the solutions are not the problem here. And in the same way, people are often make the comparison to World War II, and these nothing happened. The U.S. was willing to sit around and watch the rest of the world be taken over by the Axis powers. We got bombed. Roosevelt calls in GM and Ford and says, you're going to stop making passenger cars and start making tanks. You have 2 months. That's how we'll solve this.
Peter Whittemore again from Cohasset, Massachusetts, next door to Hull. I don't know if you were there for the blizzard of '78, but God bless you if you were. Okay, even worse. I, like you, in a sense, have gone from trying to make little dents in big piles to big dents in little piles. Say 20 years ago, I was fighting an illegal landfill in Cohasset that was about 110 acres. 4 years ago, I started fighting a swamp destruction proposal from the Army Corps of Engineers that was only 10 acres. But like you, I think that there is a way in which something very local can become a very good focus for energy, which becomes activist energy. And I do want to say that, oddly enough, in this 10-acre battle, I found myself sitting at a table with 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats. And at one point, one of the Republicans, after hearing some of my past life, said, oh my God, I'm sitting here with a radical. And so I do want to say, never underestimate the allies you may find if you pick a simple issue with a simple focus. I also want to say that I can't stay all night because I have to go down to Cohasset to a conference at the Student Center, the Center for Student Coastal Research. And it started at Cohasset High School by a guy named Jack Buckley, and they train about 10 or 15 students every year to do water quality assessment in the town of Cohasset to try and monitor what's happening. Why is the seaweed disappearing? Why are the clams disappearing? Gone. Flounder gone. Too much fresh water going into a saltwater habitat. Lobsters are dying. So my question, though, is to get to the students that are learning the techniques to give them the information. I'm more interested in how do we get people over their fear of public speaking, myself included, into becoming activists. I mean, it's one thing to be an activist and learn techniques, but how do we get this younger generation to become as activists as, say, we were in the anti-war movement or Greenpeace people were in their beginnings? And I don't know if you have any input on that, but that's what concerns me now. I mean, righteous indignation is available for those of us who pick up on it. So I'd appreciate your answers to that. Thank you.
I have a couple of things you meant. One of them is I completely agree with you on the not having blinders about who is it that cares about this. It's completely cuts across. I mean, there's a slight correlation with education, but not much. It really cuts across all political lines and boundaries and so forth. And I started thinking that way, I don't know, about 6 years ago when I noticed just randomly. For me, the most random experience of having a long conversation is when you're on a plane with somebody. If you're flying to the coast or something. The number of people, and I don't go around talking about climate because I just avoid it, unless somebody else raises it. And it was striking to me the number of people who are from, Wyoming ranchers, just all across the board. Now, they cared about the environment generally, but then specifically worried about climate. Now, that number, however, is small. I say it's 2 to 3, it's no more than 2 to 3% of the U.S. population. And the reason that I think that's the benchmark is that unlike, our major organizations, point to and are worrying about the overall polling numbers. How do you feel about climate, which are going up and down? The number that seems to me to be relevant is when asked the question, what do you think is the most important problem facing whatever, the new president, the new Congress, the world, what percentage of people say, well, fuck, climate cataclysm, or something along, maybe politer, but basically say that. Well, it's not many more than 2%. And those are the people that distinguishes it. We've never been any better than 98% of the people are in some level don't really believe this, and 2% believe it intensely. As to the students, which is actually what you asked about, I think they're doing a marvelous, first of all, I think they have a tremendous burden of trying to be activists under this looming shadow of the 60s. It's like a heavy, dead weight. How could we possibly, got to be different than that. But I think they're doing a superb job. I think that's been underreported reported in Massachusetts, but I mean, I spent 4 Sundays sleeping on the Commons. We were woken up at 2 o'clock by the Boston police, got our information collected. A few people in the room were here as well. There were 160 college students out there on October 14th. That's pretty damn good. I think they're doing a good job.
I would just add that I don't think much about radicalizing youth, because I just figure all of us are going to be radicalized by our situation sooner or later, no matter what age we are.
My name's Juliet Rooney Varga. I live in Somerville, and I'm an environmental microbiologist. I'm a professor. I will just make a confession right off the bat that I'm quite uncomfortable as an activist, although the science of climate change is sort of driving me to take action that really there are many disincentives as a professor to speak up. But I have a question sort of for you and for the group. As someone with family members in Europe, and just sort of, I don't know that much about the politics and the activist side of it and percentages of people who believe what, but my just general impression is that most European countries, the general population is quite far ahead of Americans, maybe not Cantabrigians, but the general American population, or Somervillians, the general American population in terms of seeing this as a serious issue that we need to take action on now. So the question is sort of what's different about, their standard of living is really not that different than ours. Granted, American lifestyle has a greater dependence on fossil fuels with suburbia and all that, but why is it that they're more effective in getting this message across? And then the other question that sort of may be related to that is that somewhat fortunately or misfortunately, I don't know, we've had a relatively cool year in 2008 and an anomalously, cooler temperatures in the U.S. in 2009 compared to the rest of the world. One of the things that I know my family in Hungary is experiencing heat waves more often than we are here. You go out, is it going to take those heat waves that people just go out the door and feel, or the catastrophe, a few more Katrinas or something else, before the public will respond, no matter what we do, basically?
I think Roger and I can answer this question, because we just went to Europe, if you don't mind, unless you have something you want to say.
For 5 years, and we have family there too. So.
All right, well,
go ahead.
Okay, go ahead then.
My wife and I spent the first week of the Copenhagen conference with a Danish family, and it's true what this young lady just said, that we inquired of our host, what do average citizens here see on TV? Like when there are wildfires in California, do they mention climate change? And the answer was, oh, sure, it's, you can't pin a single fire on climate change. But the difference, I think, is that Americans, this is my take, have since the beginning had this cowboy-like love of freedom and being, no big government. And I think the Europeans tend to be a little bit more open to having their government tell them something useful. Whereas here, we citizens have paid for $20 billion worth of climate research over the past 20 years, including under Bush. It's available to anybody at globalchange.gov, but citizens won't go and look. And our government won't advertise that the information is there. So we're just fat, dumb, and happy, to use an old expression, and partially because the fossil fuel companies here are so willing to deny things. Their interests are at heart. The media, the same thing, because the advertising dollars are there. And my wife wants to speak.
In Europe, even the conservatives get it. It's not a question of the liberals getting it and the conservatives not, but if they both get it, it's just that what do we do about it? There are national ads on the television talking about climate change in the UK and Denmark. There are huge, we also visited a friend in Germany. There are huge programs in Germany demanding that you convert. So it's on people's radar all the time, and this denial mechanism is not going on. And it was frankly very difficult to explain to our host what America is really like and why it is so difficult in America. It was embarrassing to try to explain it.
Europe adopted the Kyoto Protocol. We didn't, but their emissions have risen 2 to 3% since the Kyoto Protocol anyhow. So just to say that all of that's all true, it doesn't seem to be translating into exactly the kind of behaviors we would want to actually lower emissions. Plus, the other thing I have to say about Europeans is that they remember World War II and World War I, so cataclysm is not far from their minds.
One quick thing, we're trying to organize a march or a group in Washington on Earth Day, so anyone that wants to get more information, go to www.gwinnett.org and come to the Citizens Climate Congress on Earth Day.
Response to that, because I agree with you completely but I think that the unique aspect of America's character is that we shift between extremes. Most of and it's flip sides of the coin. On one side of the coin, which is that most of the time we want to be left alone and we want to be able to achieve what we can achieve. But the flip side of that is when we do move into thinking something is important that we really need to do something about as a nation, we do so in a more wholehearted way than your average European country will do so. And that's what we're aiming for.
Hi, my name's Alan Fierce. I'm from Stowe, Mass. I just think, as we sit here thinking about all of the despair that's out there on the subject of climate change and the lack of action at the national and international level, I just think in terms of personal activism, we can't give up on looking to our leaders in government, at the state and national level. We've got to keep at that. I don't know how many of you were at the Mass Climate Action Network conference that took place, I think it was right before the Copenhagen, and many of us were in a soup of despair then because it was looking like not much was going to happen. And Gina McCarthy came. And I don't know how many of you know Gina, but she's from Massachusetts. She is now the head at EPA of their air division and in charge of climate change issues as well. As many of you know, EPA is now beginning to look at serious regulation of CO2 and other greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. And she gave us a pep talk that picked me up a little bit. And it reminded me that we do have to stay active at that level. She reminded us that this is Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is different. We are different than all the other states. It is no coincidence, she said, that the House bill was called Waxman-Markey and that the Senate bill was called Boxer-Kerry. It is no coincidence that the key case that allows EPA to regulate under the Clean Air Act is Massachusetts versus EPA. We also, we have RGGI. Many parts of the country do not have anything like that. We have the Climate Solutions Act that is beginning to take some steps here. There are things, even though we may not get a NRDC bill, I don't think it's going to pass because Senator Graham now has backed away from it apparently. But there are things that need to be done at the state and national level. For example, there's a bill now filed by Senator Murkowski to take away powers from EPA to regulate under the Clean Air Act. We need to be knocking on the doors of Markey and Kerry and all those people to tell them to, and Brown, to tell them to defeat that bill. We can continue to do all the personal stuff, but we cannot forget that we have to stay active, that we are Massachusetts. We are going to lead this country. If anything is going to happen at the national level, it's probably going to be because Massachusetts got active and stayed at it.
It's interesting to say about Massachusetts. In fact, as you recall, we just had a senatorial election, and we got a result that some of us were surprised by and disappointed by it, but it seems to me that we're failing to remember the fundamental thing about politicians, which is that they love parades. And if you get a parade going, a politician will get out in front of it. The question is the parade going? In other words, the whole effort should be to walk up to Scotty Brown at this point and say, listen, hell of a victory, fantastic, came from behind. You need to provide leadership on this question. Global warming, for example. Teddy Kennedy was against Cape Wind. Now, you can't go down the route of Teddy Kennedy. You got to get out there and be for Cape Wind, right? Provide a sub-leadership in this country. If you get in front of a politician, slap him on the back and say, listen, we want you to represent those of us who are in your constituency. And if you don't think they're here, look at the parade. So if we get organizing the parade, perhaps we can bring the politician who hasn't been noted for his subtle thoughts on this problem up till now. He may even turn around and say, well, what did you have in mind? And at that point, every one of you should be able to stand up and say, funny you should ask. I have a few things in mind. Citizens groups organized to express to their leaders the fact that they ought to lead would be a revolutionary proposition, perhaps not really tried since the committees of correspondence back in another colonial period when there was a revolution going on. Ma'am, final question.
Hi, my name is Lise Blanchet. I'm French. I'm a teacher from RSB, International School of Boston. Actually, we are both, my colleague and me. And I would like to pop up a question. Maybe it's a taboo question in US, I don't know, but in France, me and my friends, we start to talk about that between us. And I think it would be a very efficient and cheap way to find an issue, a solution to the global warming. What about having just 2 or 1 child?
I'm not going to answer that one.
Well,
It's not a question, it's a proposal.
I think the Europeans are leading the way in that that area. But
Well,
it always surprises me that some people worry terribly when populations start to decline. Although I do understand that you don't want your culture to go into decline. But you know, Russians have what, 1.28 children per woman right now? That's actually steep decline.
I think that the subliminal view, as maybe expressed by ExxonMobil, which is at one level is just sheer greed. I mean, looking at the largest amount of money anybody has ever been offered in ever. But at some level, they also feel like they have to make an argument. And their basic argument is we should not shut down what we're doing now, because what we're doing now is the only thing that will move the world as swiftly as possible to a high level of prosperity everywhere. Having done that, we then solve a number of things, including population. Populations go down, people feel more secure. And at some level, I think that is a correct argument. If the worry is there's too many of us, the only answer to that is we have to provide a safe and stable future for parents around the world, in every place. And I don't see that, wouldn't particularly pick ExxonMobil's route to get there, but the core point, I think, is genuine. And I guess I do feel like I want to respond to the political question for just a second. It'll be my last thing. Where we need to be is so far off of, I mean, the election that we just went through, climate there was no discussion of it. So I didn't feel like I could support either candidate. I had somebody come to my door in the last day saying, have you voted? Because it's in JP. And I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to. It's like, oh, you've got to go vote. I was like, well, I don't think so. Neither of the candidates really addressed my issue. And, you know, the only thing I think matters. And the bright, bushy-tailed canvasser said, well, what's your issue? And I said, you know, climate cataclysm, the end of civilization. And he was like, yeah, you're right. And then he perked up and he said, but you know, Brown doesn't have a very good position on that. And I go, yeah, but your candidate doesn't either. The difference between the two is so far off. What we need to be in is a position where someone is running in that Senate race saying, there's only one thing that matters here. It's the end of the fucking world. What are you, nuts? What do we care about health care? We need to have people running for office. We need to have people in every place saying, if you don't address this, then you know, I'm going to run for office next time, and I'm certainly not going to vote for you. That's the kind of level, that's what we should be aiming for here.
Okay. Thank you, Ken and Andrea.